Would you go to any lengths to stay young forever? The chilling story of Dumplings, 2004, takes you on a dark journey in pursuit of beauty, a pursuit that comes at a cost far beyond anything imaginable. Are you ready to confront the terrifying truth? The story is truly gripping, so stick with us until the end. The film begins with a woman traveling from China to Hong Kong, carrying a lunchbox in her hand. Upon reaching her home, she opens the boxes, discards the food inside, and keeps only the last one. Inside, there's a small dish resembling momos. She carefully cleans and eats it. This dish is called Dumplings, which also happens to be the film's title. The woman's name is May. People call her Auntie May because of her age, but surprisingly, she looks like she's in her 30s. So, how is it possible that she looks so young? What's the secret behind her youthful appearance? We'll find out soon, but the truth is truly horrifying. May doesn't just make dumplings for herself. She's famous for making them. She sells them to everyone because they are fresh and delicious. But these dumplings hold the secret to her beauty and youthful looks. May uses a special ingredient in the dumplings that makes it all possible. The next day, a woman named Mrs. Lee visits May. She was once a movie star, but now, far removed from her career, she lives only as the wife of a wealthy businessman. There's no love between them, no true husband-wife bond. She married him solely for his money, seeking a higher status. But now that status seems to be slipping away. As Mrs. Lee ages, her husband's attention drifts towards younger, more beautiful women, and he spends more time with them. This leaves Mrs. Lee feeling utterly dejected. She believes she's losing everything, and if she loses her youth and beauty, she'll have nothing left. That's why today, she's come to Aunt May, because she's heard rumors about her. She has heard rumors that there's something magical in the dumplings May makes. These dumplings possess a power so strong that anyone who eats them begins to look younger. The changes are so drastic that a person's age starts to appear much younger. They can even stop or reverse aging, making someone so beautiful that everyone around them would be drawn to them. However, Mrs. Lee is skeptical and refuses to believe such claims without evidence. So she asks May, "Please, show me some proof." May calmly responds, "How old do you think I am?" Mrs. Lee looks at her and says, "You look like someone around 30 years old." In response, May says, "Well, my age is much more than 30. You couldn't even guess my age, so what more proof do you need? I add a special ingredient to my dumplings that has such magical powers. Nothing else can give you the same beauty and youth. I've become young and beautiful just by eating these dumplings. No cream, no lotion can give you these results. Even if you undergo treatment or surgery, you won't see such incredible changes. Aging is a natural process that everyone goes through, and one day, everyone must grow old. To slow down aging and look younger, it can't be achieved from the outside, but it can be done from within, and that's what I do through my dumplings." Mrs. Lee, after hearing May's explanation, agrees to try the dumplings. Initially, she hesitates, unsure whether to take the risk. But as she thinks about the potential consequences, she decides to eat them. She tells herself, "This might be my last option. Who knows? It could be a miracle for me." And so, she goes to May's house and starts eating the dumplings. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she notices that the ingredients May uses seem to involve the meat of small animals, but she doesn't give it much thought. Mrs. Lee wasn't interested in knowing anything else. She was only focused on the results, and she wanted them fast. As May had claimed, these dumplings seemed to be the solution to her problems. Around this time, she also noticed that her husband was going on more trips. Mrs. Lee knew very well who he was spending his time with during those trips. But despite being fully aware of the situation, she endured the pain and continued to live in sadness. She couldn't do much about it. If she questioned her husband further, he would simply hand her a check with a huge sum of money. But that was all he could offer her. Money. He couldn't give her anything else. Not love, not attention, nor time. Because of this, Mr. Lee was falling deeper into hopelessness. Mrs. Lee, who never liked dishes like dumplings before, found herself eating them out of desperation. She had no other choice. Not only that, but now she also started giving May tips on how to prepare better dumplings. "Make them like this. Add this ingredient, it will make the dumplings tastier," she suggested, believing that it might help her situation. A few days passed like this, and May began to notice a change in Mrs. Lee. Her skin was starting to look younger, but Mrs. Lee was impatient and wanted quicker results. So she asked May, "Please do something so I can see better results overnight." May agreed and promised, "Yes, it will happen." After Mrs. Lee left, a woman came to May's house, bringing her young daughter with her. The girl's name was Kate. From their conversation, we learned that there used to be a very respected lady doctor who handled at least 10 cases a day. Though she had given up this work, the woman had brought her daughter Kate to May. Kate was just 15 years old, yet she was about to become a mother. The woman reveals that the father of the child is none other than Kate's own father. Now that Kate is pregnant, her mother is running from door to door, seeking help. She either wants to help her daughter give birth or end the pregnancy altogether. May examines Kate and discovers that the baby is already 6 months along. This situation was incredibly difficult for May to handle, so she refuses to help. She tells the woman, "I can't do anything about it. You should contact the black market. There, you'll find a hospital where they can either help deliver your daughter's baby or perform an abortion. They handle such cases. I'm still in contact with that hospital." However, May wasn't a doctor at that hospital. She used to steal the meat of small children from there. In fact, the special ingredient in her dumplings was not the meat of any animals, but the meat of children. This was May's dark secret. On the other hand, Mrs. Lee had become aware that her husband was having an affair with a hotel staff member who would visit his room every night and stay there. Mrs. Lee could no longer tolerate this, so she called May to her house. She tried to explain, "Look, I have no existence outside of my home and my husband. I want to expand my family. I love children, but for some reason it's just not happening." Seeing her deep disappointment, May decided that no matter the cost, she would help her. Meanwhile, Kate's health was also deteriorating. It soon became clear that Kate was indeed pregnant, and her mother was deeply worried about her. Seeing this, May decided to help them both. The very next day, she called Kate and her mother to her house. May assisted Kate in giving birth to the child without any sedative or medicine. Kate endured great pain as the child came into the world. When May saw the baby, a strange smile appeared on her face. Because looking at the child, she realized this was exactly what she needed. May saw the child as the key to restoring Mrs. Lee's youth, as the baby was very healthy. May had been using baby meat in her dumplings, which she had stolen from the hospital. However, the children she used before had short lifespans. But this child, born from 5 mothers, was much stronger and more nutritious. With this strength, May believed that Mrs. Lee would regain her youth overnight, just as she had hoped. It was going to work like magic. May thought to herself that if she had given Kate medicine to sedate her, the qualities of the meat would have been lost. That's why she stored the baby's meat in her fridge to preserve its strength. The next day, when Mrs. Lee came to her house, May took out the meat to mix into the dumplings. For a long time, Mrs. Lee had been curious about what May was adding to the dumplings. Today, she could no longer hold back her curiosity. She quietly made her way to the kitchen, where May was preparing to grind the meat finely. When Mrs. Lee saw this, she was so horrified that she immediately ran out of the house, unable to bear the terrifying sight. After seeing and realizing what May had been doing, Mrs. Lee began to vomit, horrified that she had been eating such a thing for so long. But then she started thinking about her husband and herself. She thought, "My beauty and looks are the most important things to me. As I grow older, all of these things are fading away. If I continue like this, one day my husband will definitely leave me." In that moment, Mrs. Lee thought, "If this is the solution to my problem, then maybe it's the right one after all." She was willing to overlook everything for the sake of her youth and beauty. Determined to stay young and beautiful, Mrs. Lee decided that if eating the dumplings made from baby meat could keep her youthful, she wouldn't stop. She gathered her resolve and went back to May's house. May prepared the same dumplings, adding the same meat, and gave them to Mrs. Lee to eat. As Mrs. Lee thought about the promising results, she didn't just eat the dumplings, she savored every bite, enjoying the taste. May watched her, confidently promising, "These dumplings will make you exactly what you want and give you a new, happy life. Very soon, you will start seeing the difference in yourself," May had assured Mrs. Lee. After hearing these words, Mrs. Lee felt a sense of hope and satisfaction as she ate the special dumplings. A few days later, the changes May had promised began to unfold. Mrs. Lee looked so young and attractive that her husband Lee couldn't take his eyes off her. He praised her, saying she looked absolutely lovely. This made Mrs. Lee incredibly happy. After so long, both of them spent a good time together, rekindling the connection they had lost. Mrs. Lee thought her life had finally become happy again. Her husband was now giving her his full attention, leaving his work behind to spend time with her, which was a big change for her. However, it is true that every miracle comes with side effects, bad effects, and unintended consequences. One day, Mrs. Lee held a party at her house, inviting friends and relatives. Everyone praised her beauty, admiring how youthful and attractive she looked. But when she sat down in the middle of the gathering, something strange happened. A foul smell of fish began to emanate from her body, shocking everyone around her. The smell caused Mrs. Lee immense embarrassment, and she had no choice but to leave the party. She locked herself in the bathroom and took a long bath, trying to cleanse herself. As she soaked in the water, she thought, "How could May do this to me? She should have warned me about these side effects earlier." Feeling frustrated, she called May and told her everything that had happened. May responded calmly, saying, "I never knew about these side effects. Nothing like that happened to me. It's possible that this is the first time something like this has happened to your body. It will be fine by the day after tomorrow." Mrs. Lee, reassured by May's words, tried to relax, believing that everything would return to normal soon. However, she was unaware that her husband, standing outside, had overheard their entire conversation. He had already suspected that his wife was using something special, perhaps an herb, medicine, or something intoxicating. After hearing May's explanation, Lee became even more suspicious and decided to confront her. The very next day, he went to May's house. There, she offered him the same dumplings. Over time, Lee uncovered the horrifying truth. May was a cannibal. She had been consuming human meat, which was the source of her youth and beauty. It was this cannibalism that allowed her to maintain such a young and attractive appearance. May had been using the same trick on others, feeding them her special dumplings, all while hiding her dark secret. Although she was 65 years old, she appeared to be in her 30s. Lee, however, wasn't bothered by the fact that May was a cannibal. What mattered to him was her youth and beauty. He became captivated by her and at first sight began developing feelings for her. May, knowing how to manipulate him, recognized an opportunity. She knew how to use Lee to her advantage and exploit him. Eventually, she trapped him into a relationship, knowing that this would benefit her. May didn't want to miss this opportunity. After that, both of them spent time together, completely ignoring Mrs. Lee. What more could May ask for? A rich man had fallen for her. For Lee, it was all about beauty, and Mrs. Lee couldn't easily let go of chasing May. She felt the need to stay in contact with her, as her body had become dependent on those dumplings. If she stopped eating them, she feared her youth and beauty would vanish. She was already noticing signs of this. Marks were forming on her body, red spots appeared, and she couldn't even sleep. Mrs. Lee went out, desperately demanding the dumplings, but May refused to listen to her. Meanwhile, the child Kate had given birth to was suffering intensely due to May's improper handling of the delivery. The pain was unbearable for Kate, who was just a child herself, and tragically, she died. After her daughter's death, Kate's mother went mad with grief. Consumed by anger and sorrow, she took matters into her own hands and killed her husband, who she held responsible for her daughter's death and the wrongdoings that had led to this tragedy. The neighbors alerted the police about the situation, and they arrived to arrest Kate's mother. During questioning, she mentioned May's name. However, by the time the police arrived, May had already packed her belongings and fled. May managed to escape, but Mrs. Lee found herself trapped. She realized that without the dumplings, she wouldn't survive. Her youth and beauty would fade away, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing them. With May gone, Lee knew she had to figure out a way to make the dumplings herself, no matter the cost. Mrs. Lee tracks down the hotel staff with whom her husband, Lee, had an affair. She learns that the woman is 5 months pregnant, and that Lee had made an agreement with her, promising a large sum of money if she gave birth to the child. Mrs. Lee, desperate to regain her youth, approaches the woman and offers her double the amount of money Lee had promised, saying, "I want the child of 5 mothers, and I will pay you double the amount." She had 2 goals in mind. First, if she could get the child, the woman would no longer be of use to Lee, and he would eventually leave her. This would remove the obstacle in her way. Secondly, she was hopeful that the girl would not survive the pregnancy, which would allow her to take the child. With that child, she believed she could maintain her youthful beauty. The girl agrees, and Mrs. Lee takes her to the doctor to have the child born, just like May had done, without any intoxicating medicine. Mrs. Lee wants the child to be completely healthy, and as she had hoped, the girl dies during the process. Once she has the child, Mrs. Lee takes him home and prepares to grind the meat for her dumplings. In the end, Mrs. Lee becomes a murderer in the pursuit of beauty, just like May. She no longer needs anyone or any other process, as she can now buy children in exchange for money, and by consuming them, she will always remain beautiful and young. This fulfills her desire to always stay youthful and win her husband's love, which she now believes is assured. Her husband will no longer look at anyone else, but only at her. However, the terrible truth behind this is that her beauty and happiness come at the cost of innocence. And with that, the story ends. So friends, How did you like the story? By the way, what do you do to maintain your beauty? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.